Buildings remember things people forget. Ice rinks remember in the most honest material there is, a surface that shows every flaw, every shortcut, every truth, the moment a skate blade touches it. Dietrich Voss had spent 24 years learning to read that surface inside the Corrigan Community Ice Arena, a building that had opened in 1981, and had been making ice the same way ever since. Its original refrigeration plant still humming beneath the rink slab after more than 4 decades of continuous winters. He was 59 now, ice technician and facility supervisor, responsible for the surface that thousands of youth hockey players and public skaters crossed every season, without ever wondering what kept it frozen beneath them. He had learned to wonder about exactly that from a man named Garrick Mullen, who had held Dietrich's job for 21 years before him and who believed, with a conviction he never softened for anyone, that the ice itself was the most reliable instrument in the entire building. Dietrich started at Corrigan at 35, hired as Mullen's assistant during a period when the arena was expanding its youth league programming and needed a second set of hands on a resurfacer. Mullen was 60 then, broad-shouldered and weathered, with the deliberate patience of a man who had spent 2 decades listening to compressors and reading frost patterns the way other people read weather reports. "The ice tells you everything," Mullen told him. During Dietrich's first week, the two of them standing at the boards while the resurfacer finished its slow, gleaming loop around the rink. The plant, the slab, the ground underneath, all of it shows up in the surface eventually. You just have to be willing to read the whole sheet instead of just the parts that skate well. Mullen kept resurfacing logs, daily notes on ice temperature, hardness, and surface condition across every section of the rink, recorded in a firm, slanted hand in spiral notebooks he stacked chronologically on a shelf in the plant room. Not because the arena required that level of detail, because Mullen believed a sheet of ice was a report the building wrote fresh every single day, and somebody ought to be reading it. Dietrich remembered watching him work in those early seasons. The way Mullen would pause the resurfacer mid-loop if something on the surface caught his eye, climb down, crouch at center ice with one bare palm flat against the sheet, and stay there for a long moment as though listening through his hand. Other staff found it eccentric. Dietrich found it instructive. A man who had been right too many times to dismiss was worth imitating, even before you understood what he was doing. When Mullen retired, he left Dietrich the entire shelf of notebooks, along with a piece of advice Dietrich had carried for 24 years since. When a section of ice misbehaves, don't just fix the ice. Ask why that section. Ice doesn't misbehave randomly. It misbehaves specifically, and when it keeps misbehaving in the same place for years, it isn't misbehaving at all. It's reporting. The Corrigan Arena was a simple building by design, a single rink under a barrel-vaulted roof, bleachers along one side, a snack counter that served the same hot chocolate recipe since the Reagan administration, and mechanical plant room behind the north wall, where the original 1981 brine system pushed chilled fluid through a grid of pipes embedded in the concrete slab beneath the ice. Dietrich knew the building the way he knew his own kitchen. He knew the third compressor developed a faint whistle 2 weeks before it needed servicing every time. He knew the bleacher section nearest the entrance doors flexed with a specific groan during tournament weekends when it filled beyond its usual load. He knew which sections of the rink's dasher boards had been replaced over the decades and which still carried puck marks from games played before some current players' parents were born. And he knew, better than anyone alive, that the northeast corner never froze quite right. It wasn't dramatic. Spectators never noticed it. Most skaters never consciously noticed it either, though the older hockey coaches sometimes ran their drills at the other end without being able to say exactly why they preferred it. One figure skating instructor, years back, had quietly rearranged her lesson patterns to keep her youngest students away from that corner, and when Dietrich once asked her why, she had shrugged and said the ice there felt tired. She couldn't explain it better than that. Dietrich had written the phrase into his log that same evening, because it was the most accurate description anyone had ever given him. A roughly 10-foot by 10-foot section of ice near the northeast corner boards ran consistently softer than the rest of the surface, holding an edge slightly differently, scarring a little more easily under blades, needing an extra pass on the resurfacer that no other section required. Mullen's earliest specific entry about it, dated 1988, read, "An E-corner still soft after full free cycle. Brine lines tested even across the whole slab. No difference detected in flow or temperature at that section supply line. Ice just doesn't want to hold there. Watching it, Dietrich had read that entry during his first winter with the notebooks. Sitting in the plant room with the compressors humming around him, and felt something settle into place that he wouldn't fully understand for years. Mullen had noticed something real. Mullen had never solved it, and Mullen had kept logging it anyway. Season after season, patient enough to preserve a pattern he never got to finish explaining. Dietrich continued the logging without ever being asked to. Each season, he noted the northeast corner's condition, its extra resurfacing passes, its stubborn softness after freeze cycles that left every other section glass-hard. Nobody at the arena required this of him. He simply continued because Mullen had asked him to keep reading the whole sheet, and Mullen had never once, in 21 years of notebooks, recorded anything that turned out not to matter. The pattern held. Winter after winter, the same corner, the same softness, the same extra pass. In his 12th year with the notebooks, Dietrich began doing something Mullen's simpler condition notes had never included. Precise hardness measurements, taken with a calibrated tool at fixed points across the rink, recorded as exact figures rather than general observations. It took him nearly a decade of those measurements to see what Mullen's qualitative entries could never have shown clearly. The soft patch wasn't staying the same size. It was expanding, a few additional inches each season, creeping gradually outward from the northeast corner into surrounding ice, slowly enough that no single winter's readings looked alarming, unmistakably once laid out across 10 years of careful figures. He sat with that realization one evening in the plant room, the compressors cycling steadily around him, Mullen's oldest notebook open on the workbench beside his own. He laid the two records side by side, Mullen's firm slanted hand describing the same corner across 2 decades, his own tighter figures continuing the account across a third and into a fourth. 2 men, 1 building, 36 years of the same quiet question asked and never answered. If the expansion had been happening since Mullen's first 1988 entry, the soft patch had once been considerably smaller than anyone now living remembered it. Something under that corner wasn't just persisting, it was growing. Slowly enough to hide inside any single season, steadily enough that the notebooks, read together, left no room for doubt. He thought about how many thousands of skaters had crossed that corner over the decades. Children learning to stop, league players chasing pucks into boards. None of them had ever known. They were skating over the one place in the building where something underneath had been quietly failing since before most of them were born. He wrote his own note beneath Mullen's original entry, in the same plain hand Mullen had modeled for him. 10 years of hardness figures confirm the soft section is not stable. It is expanding, slowly, consistently, 'cause still unknown, continuing to measure. He underlined continuing. It felt like the only honest were available to him. Dietrich had a theory, in his 16th year, that the cause might be an airflow problem. A draft from a northeast corner's emergency exit door, warming that section of the surface from above every time the door's aging weather stripping let outside air seep through. He spent the better part of a winter sealing and monitoring that doorway, installing new weather stripping, logging surface temperatures before and after, convinced he had finally found something simple enough to fix with materials he already had in the supply room. The readings ruled it out completely. The surface temperature above the soft patch matched the rest of the rink almost exactly. Whatever was softening, that ice wasn't coming from the air above it. It was coming from below, from the slab, or from something underneath the slab, in the one place Dietrich's thermometers couldn't reach. He had been wrong. He wrote it plainly in the notebook, in the same unembellished style Mullen had taught him without ever meaning to teach a lesson. Airflow theory. Ruled out. Surface temps even across the sheet. The problem is under the slab, not above it. Back to unexplained. It bothered him more than most of his wrong guesses did. He had wanted the door to be the answer. It was simple, cheap, fixable in an afternoon. Being wrong meant the cause lived somewhere beneath 4 inches of concrete and 40 years of ice, a place nobody had looked since the building was poured, and a place nobody could look without tearing up the rink itself. The upgrade announcement arrived in his 22nd year. The arena's ownership approved a major refrigeration plant modernization. The original 1981 brine system replaced with a modern glycol system, more efficient, more reliable, long overdue. The project plan called for the new glycol supply lines to run through the same underslab channels as the old brine lines, reusing the existing distribution layout without individually re-verifying each section against the original construction records. Dietrich read the project brief and felt an old unease resurface. A new, more powerful system pushing chilled fluid through the same channels would simply inherit whatever had been quietly undermining the northeast corner for 36 years. The upgrade wouldn't investigate the problem. It would bury it under a new layer of equipment and assumptions, at exactly the moment when the only remaining reason to examine that section of slab was about to disappear. He brought Mullen's notebooks, along with his own decade of precise hardness figures, to the refrigeration contractor overseeing the upgrade. The contractor was a capable, experienced man named Alden Price, who reviewed the original 1981 brine line schematics against Dietrich's data with genuine attention. The northeast section supply line is identical in spec to every other section on this drawing, Price said, tracing the schematic across the plant room workbench. Same pipe, same spacing, same flow rating. If the line itself were the problem, we'd see it in the flow readings, and we don't. Honestly, this reads like a minor quirk in the original slab pour, a little unevenness in the concrete from day one. The new glycol system runs colder and distributes more evenly than this old brine setup ever did. Whatever's been bothering that corner, the new plant will most likely handle it just by being better equipment. The soft patch is growing, Dietrich said. It's been growing for at least 10 years that I can prove, and probably for 36. A quirk in a slab pour doesn't grow. Something under there is changing. Price considered that, and to his credit, didn't wave it away. I hear you, but I can't justify tearing into a slab based on ice hardness numbers when every mechanical reading we have says the system underneath is uniform. The upgrade budget doesn't include exploratory demolition. I think the new plant solves this. It was a reasonable position, and Dietrich didn't have an engineering credential to argue against it directly. What he had was 36 years of a pattern that had outlasted a ruled-out theory and every mechanical test anyone had ever run, and a growing conviction that the answer had been sitting under 4 inches of concrete since 1981, in the one place no reading could reach. Dietrich didn't sleep well through the weeks that followed. He kept circling back to an uncomfortable question he couldn't fully resolve. What if Price was right, and 36 years of careful logging amounted to nothing more than a slightly uneven concrete pour, an ordinary imperfection he and Mullen had slowly turned into a mystery through sheer accumulated attention? He had wanted for years for the expanding patch to mean something real, something significant enough to justify 2 careers of measuring ice nobody else thought twice about. Wanting it to matter wasn't the same as it actually mattering. He pulled Mullen's oldest notebook down from the plant room shelf one more evening and reread the 1988 entry slowly. Ice just doesn't want to hold there. Watching it. Mullen had never known what caused it either. He had simply kept watching, season after season, trusting that the pattern itself was worth preserving even without an explanation attached to it. Dietrich had inherited that same trust without ever fully testing whether it held up against a contractor's confident reading of a clean mechanical schematic. He didn't have the cause confirmed yet. But not having it hadn't stopped Mullen from writing the first entry in 1988, and it wasn't a reason for Dietrich to stop pushing now. With a new system about to be installed over the same unexamined ground, he requested, at his own initiative, a single day with a building diagnostic specialist before the new glycol lines went in, not to delay the upgrade. He made clear only to examine what was actually under that corner of the slab while the old system was already shut down for replacement. The specialist was a woman named Priya Anand, who worked with older recreational facilities and specialized in evaluating slab and subslab conditions without demolition. She reviewed the arena's original 1981 construction records alongside Dietrich's decades of hardness data, and she brought thermal imaging equipment and a subsurface scanner to examine the slab during the brief window when the ice was off and the concrete lay bare. What she found, confirmed by the end of a single afternoon, explained 36 years of soft ice that nobody had ever been able to name. The thermal scan showed at first a distinct warm zone in the slab at the northeast corner, roughly 10 feet by 10 feet, where heat from the ground beneath was reaching the concrete at a rate the rest of the rink never experienced. The subsurface scan explained why. Beneath that section, The insulation board that was supposed to isolate the slab and the ground read thinner than everywhere else, noticeably thinner and inconsistent with the uniform insulation layers shown in the original construction drawings. Somewhere during the original 1981 install, the insulation under this corner was damaged and patched with thinner material, explained, showing Dietrich the scan results on her laptop at the boards. It never made it into any as-built drawing. Whoever did it probably considered a minor fix at the time. But thinner insulation means chronic heat gain from the ground. Right here, every day the plant has ever run, and insulation degrades as it ages. The thinner it started, the faster that degradation shows. That's your soft patch, and that's why it's been growing. Dietrich looked from the laptop screen to the bare concrete of the northeast corner, unremarkable to the eye, indistinguishable from every other square foot of slab in the building. 43 years of construction crew's minor shortcut, sitting silently under the ice, announcing itself through nothing except a softness that two stubborn men had refused to stop writing down. Mullen logged his corner in 1988, he said, 7 years after the pour. It was already showing by then. It would have been, Priya said, probably from a very first season. Smaller, subtler, but your predecessor was reading a real signal. He just didn't have any way to see what was sending it. And the new glycol system, Dietrich asked, would fight this corner forever, Priya said. More energy, more resurfacing, and eventually accelerated cracking in the slab right here, where the temperature swing is largest. New equipment doesn't fix old insulation. It just hides the problem behind better performance for a while. Priya's findings went to the arena's ownership within the week. Alden Price reviewed the full report personally and called Dietrich afterward. You were right to push for this, Price said. Every mechanical reading I had was telling the truth. The lines are fine. The problem was never in anything my instruments were pointed at. If we installed a new system over that corner as planned, we have built a permanent cold spot in the plant's efficiency and probably cracked that section of slab within a decade. The upgrade was revised. The northeast corner slab section was open during the changeover, the only time in 43 years the building would ever allow it. The degraded substitute insulation removed and proper full-thickness board installed for the first time in the arena's history. The new glycol system went in afterward, running over ground that finally matched what the original 1981 drawings had always claimed was there. The arena filed a formal note in its facility's records, crediting both Garrick Mullen's original 1988 observation and Dietrich's decades of continued measurement as the reason a hidden construction defect had been found and corrected during the one window when fixing it was possible. Dietrich kept Mullen's notebooks. He added a final entry of his own before moving the whole shelf into the arena's office archive. Any corner insulation corrected this year. Original defect traced to a 1981 installation patch, documented informally through ice behavior since 1988. First season on record with even hardness across the full sheet. Garrick, you were right. The ice was telling us everything. Neither of us knew what it was saying for a very long time. He stood at the boards on a cold evening early the next season, watching the resurfacer finish its slow, gleaming loop, the northeast corner shining exactly like every other section of the sheet for the first time in the building's memory. He ran his hardness tool over that corner one last time, out of habit more than need. The figure matched the rest of the rink precisely. He thought about Mullen, standing at these same boards decades earlier, telling a nervous new hire that the ice tells you everything if you're willing to read the whole sheet. Dietrich had carried that sentence through 24 years, through a ruled-out airflow theory, through a season of genuine doubt about whether 2 careers of quiet measurement had ever amounted to more than stubbornness. He hadn't needed to understand the cause immediately. He had only needed to keep reading, the way Mullen had taught him, until the ice finally explained itself to someone patient enough to read every winter for 36 years.